Nothing is better on a frosty morning than a hot breakfast. Today I'll use my mess kit to make a simple and quick porridge with a decidedly New England twist that uses a souvenir shop treat to convert the simple meal into a sweet, energy packed powerhouse. On this week's Making a Mess with the Yankee Camper Maple Cream of Wheat. Let's put our ingredients together for this very simple recipe. The first thing you'll need is cream of wheat. This is the 2.5 minute regular cream of wheat, not the instant. I've not tried this recipe with the instant. So you'll need 3 tablespoons of cream of wheat. You'll also need 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. I use the coarse salt. As an option, I've added 2 tablespoons of crushed pecans. I just crumbled these up and I put them into the mixture that totaled 6 pecan halves. So I've put all of those into a Loctite plastic bag, and I'm going to add that into my paper bag, which I've marked maple cream of wheat. I'm also going to add in 1 5-ounce can of evaporated milk. This is evaporated, not condensed milk. And I'll place that right in here. And lastly, I have about 1.5 ounces of pure maple sugar candy. These are from New Hampshire. And these are simply made from pure maple sugar. There's nothing added. I'll seal this up, and this will be my breakfast out at the campsite. But first, let me tell you the history of maple sugaring in New England. Honeybees are not native to North America. They were introduced in the 1600s. That doesn't mean that the indigenous population didn't have their own sweetener, however. It literally grew on trees. Well, actually, it helped trees grow. Although Europe has their own native maple trees, only the trees in America, specifically the northern part of the continent, has trees with sap that contains enough sugar to make it worth the effort. And Native Americans were making the effort for thousands of years before the Europeans arrived. In the spring, as the weather begins to warm, they'd collect the sap by notching a V in the outer bark and collecting the liquid using a reed to drip into a birch bark vessel. Then, letting the liquid freeze in the cold, it would separate the water from the maple sugar. This would be used for preservation of foods and quick energy when needed. The native people would also use hot rocks to bring the sap to a boil, evaporating off the water as well. This was a very time-consuming process. Depending on the specific type of maple tree, do you know that it takes between 50 to 80 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup? Sugar maples do the best, but red, black, and silver maples will also work. However, they require more sap. 1 tap can produce about 30 gallons of sap in a 6-week period. That means 1 sugar maple can produce about a half a gallon of maple syrup. That's enough for me, but I don't know what you're having. To see how it's actually done these days, we took a ride to watch a couple of sappy guys make maple syrup. No, really, that's the name of their sugar shack. Jason and Mark were very gracious in allowing me to video their process. We visited on the Saturday of New Hampshire Maple Weekend in March. It was time for me to restock my syrup supply for the summer, and I'm always happy to get it fresh from the makers. We arrived just as they were getting underway. Mark was loading up the supply for the wood-burning evaporator. It's nice to see a small business using modern technology to improve the traditional process while keeping the art alive. The days of metal buckets hanging from a maple tree are past. Blue lines now run down to a vacuum shack that helps pull the sap from the trees and reduces waste and contamination. This is pumped into a holding tank outside. It's next run through a reverse osmosis system where as much as 80% of the water is removed. That means that the original 60 gallons of sap is now only 6 gallons of concentrated liquid needing to be boiled off for 1 gallon of syrup. The concentrate is next pumped to a holding tank over the rear of the facility. This and the outside tank are monitored on a screen using cameras watching the precious sap. Jason fired up the evaporator and the liquid was gravity fed into the troughs on top of the firebox. It took about 15 minutes for the concentrated sap to start to heat up, and suddenly the aroma was tantalizing sweetness. Soon steam was rising while Mark kept an eye on things, using a commercial defoamer to prevent an overboil. There was a temperature gauge with the magic number of 219 degrees. Once the syrup reached that temperature, the valve would open and would flow. As it continued to heat, the amount of steam rising increased. Now is the critical time. The temperature is met and the syrup begins to flow. Mark continues to monitor the syrup's temperature to assure it settles, preventing an overboil and a sticky mess. Jason explains that the next process is to press the liquid gold to remove any solids, I assume like cake sugar, and then it goes into a final small vat for bottling and sale to people like you and me. It was fascinating to watch the process, and I recommend taking the opportunity to see it for yourself if you get the chance. Creating maple sugar is an additional process, but that's not in the cards for these two sappy guys, at least not yet. Now, you know. Let's head out to my winter camp to make my hot breakfast. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that it runs on coffee. I don't receive any compensation for this. I do this because I enjoy being outside and sharing that with you, as well as bringing you some of the history of New England in the area. If you'd like to support my channel, you can buy me a cup of coffee. I'll put the link right here. Thank you. Let's get back to watching the video. It's pretty chilly out here this morning. And I'm going to make my maple cream of wheat breakfast. I brought with me some pre-cooked bacon, so I'm going to heat that up, and while that starts to cook, I'm going to put together the ingredients for the breakfast. I put that bacon in my fry pan. Let me just light the stove. Turn that heat down. I don't want to burn the bacon. Just let it heat through. It's about 27 degrees out here this morning, so it's pretty cool. Now we'll just keep an eye on that bacon. We've got our maple sugar, can of evaporated milk, and our cream of wheat with pecans. Well, that bacon started to heat up. I'm going to turn that down. And I'm just going to move this over to the fire. And that'll let that bacon stay warm. For this recipe, we're just going to need our small pot. Let's start with 1/4 cup of water. And I'll start by shaking up the evaporated milk. That needs a really good shake. We'll open the evaporated milk using our church key. We'll pour that in as well. Give that a stir. Light the stove. Place that milk and water right on top. I've set that to a medium-high heat. I'm just going to let that start to heat up. Put the cover on. Keep the heat inside. That's probably going to take, I don't know, about 2 minutes before it starts to heat. In the meantime, I'm going to open my candy and separate those out. You can see those are just individual little pieces of different types. Those are all just little shapes. This one happens to be a fleur-de-lis. Let's go ahead and check that milk. Yeah, that's starting to heat up. You'll want to take your candies and just put them right into the milk as it heats. Give those a stir. As that mixture heats, it will melt the maple sugar candy down into the rest of the milk and water. Now you want to be careful to not scorch the milk. Also, you don't want it to come up to a boil. Just keep an eye on it. Give it a stir. Let that candy start to melt into the mixture. Requires a little bit of patience. That's okay. Don't overheat the milk and don't let it come to a boil. You can see that candy started to melt. Just continue to stir it. While I tend the fire and let the maple sugar melt into the milk, let me tell you about a New England icon who used the winter weather to his advantage. During the French and Indian War, Robert Rogers earned a reputation for attacking the enemy during the cold months when most armies were encamped. He used snowshoes and skates to move over the ground and waterways, as well as utilized sleds for moving supplies. It's likely that Henry Knox was influenced by these tactics some 20 years later in his noble train of artillery, moving cannons to Boston from Fort Ticonderoga at the start of the American Revolution. Rogers was born in Methuen, Massachusetts in 1731. The family then moved to the wilderness of New Hampshire to what is now Dunbarton, just south of Concord, when Robert was 8 years old. He grew up exploring the wilderness around his home. This was a dangerous time with the Abenaki having sided with the French in King George's War. At age 14, Rogers joined the local militia, which was a scouting company. That conflict ended in 1748, but the peace did not hold. In 1754, a young lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia accidentally started the 7 Years' War when he ordered the surprise attack of a band of French soldiers at Jumonville Glen, resulting in the death of the French-Canadian officer. The Virginian who ordered the attack was a 22-year-old George Washington. The following year, as the war escalated, Rogers relocated to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where he was placed in charge of a group of elite warriors known as Rangers. His skills as a woodsman and his observation of Native American strategies allowed him to develop unconventional guerrilla-type tactics against the enemy. His small company initially consisted of between 35 and 50 volunteers, plus officers. Like their leader, these were men who had a background in scouting and had been selected by Rogers for their skills. One of the officers was his friend and neighbor, John Stark, who had become known for his military action during the American Revolution. Captain Rogers gained notoriety for his bold actions in harassing the enemy around Lake George and Fort Killian, later Ticonderoga, during the harsh winter months. As his reputation grew, so did his command, until he was overseeing as many as 14 companies with between 1,200 and 1,400 men. These troops performed reconnaissance, raids, and unconventional warfare. Rogers' Rangers led the vanguard on the campaign against Montreal, thus essentially bringing the conflict in America to a close. As the elite group expanded, Robert felt there was a need for a list of principles to cover the guidelines of what was expected. In 1757, he wrote his 28 Rules of Ranging, broken into 5 distinct sections. These were designed to remind those under his command what was necessary to survive and maintain an advantage over the enemy. He later took part in fighting for the crown in Pontiac's rebellion. Robert Rogers was the most famous American military commander prior to the War for Independence. After the 7 Years' War concluded, Rogers unsuccessfully petitioned Parliament for repayment of his personal fortune expended to keep his men paid during the conflict. This led to a stint in debtor's prison in England. When the American colonies declared war against King George, Rogers attempted to offer his services to the Continental Army. But the time he'd spent in London trying to recoup his funds made George Washington suspicious that he may be a spy. The general was likely wise in his decision, as Rogers then offered his services to His Majesty King George and was instrumental in the capture of Nathan Hale. The British integrated some of Rogers' Ranger tactics into their regular military. Not to be outdone, the Americans did the same during the War of 1812. As a matter of fact, the Queen's Rangers of Canada, as well as the U.S. Army Rangers, not only trace their roots back to Rogers' Rangers, they still include the original 28 Rules of Ranging in their handbook. Now, you know. I don't think I'll need Rule 14, which states to post a sentry when eating, so let's get back to making breakfast. That candy has all melted. The milk is pretty hot, so I'm going to take my cream of wheat with my pecans, and I'm just going to add that right into the mixture. Continue to gently stir that, and it'll begin to thicken. That will take about 2.5 minutes. As that cream of wheat heats, it's going to sort of take on the texture and thicken to be like that of applesauce. I'm going to turn the heat off. Show you how that looks. Put that right into my bowl here. I'll add in my bacon that I've had going over at the fire, keeping it nice and warm. Maple cream of wheat with a side of bacon. I'm going to eat my breakfast and then I'll clean up my mess. If you've enjoyed this video, please take a moment and give it a thumbs up. It just lets YouTube know that you enjoy the videos that I put out. Also, consider subscribing to my channel. I try to put out a video just about every week on the places that I camp, like here up in Lincoln, New Hampshire, the camping gear that I use, and recipes that I make in my mess kit. Also, if you have any thoughts, things you'd like to share, leave it in the comments section below. I try to answer every single one. Until next time, get outside, and thank you for watching. Oh, that'll heat you up from the inside when it's cold.